Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Naga Monchetti and John Kay.
Our headlines today. The SNP wins key seats, but its chance of winning an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament remain on a knife edge.
Counting continues in England. The Conservatives follow up their by-election win in Hartlepool with more significant gains over Labour.
It's better news for Labour in Wales as it matches its best ever Senedd election result.
Holiday bookings surge as 12 countries are added to the UK's green travel list, but the industry says it's too cautious.
Talking of which, that travel list, don't go to Istanbul, fans of Chelsea and Manchester City are told. And they're now calling on UEFA to move the Champions League final to Wembley after the government added Turkey to that red travel list.
And weather-wise, we're in the company of low pressure, introducing an unsettled story across much of the UK. But we'll also notice those temperatures rise. I'll return with all the details.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 8th of May. Our top story is that the SNP's hopes of an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament still lie in the balance today.
Yes, with votes still being counted, the party needs another 26 seats to win total control. But two key targets of Dumbarton and Eastwood have been missed. With all the details, here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
Angus Robertson, Scottish National Party, 16,276.
Every seat that has changed hands in Scotland has gone to the SNP. With a dramatic victory in Edinburgh Central, previously held by former Tory leader Ruth Davidson. They also took Ayr from the Tories and East Lothian from Labour. It's a return for one of the SNP's big hitters.
In this most European of capital cities, people have resoundingly rejected the party of Brexit and Boris Johnson. The public has rejected all of the parties that want to block an independence referendum.
Nicola Sturgeon is confident she will win a mandate to hold another vote on leaving the UK and secure a remarkable fourth term in government.
If that is indeed the outcome of this election, I pledge today to get back to work immediately, to continue to steer this country through the crisis of COVID, to lead this country into recovery from COVID, and then, when the time is right, to offer this country the choice of a better future.
Voters who don't want independence appear to be using their votes tactically to back unionist parties. In Dumbarton, Labour held on as Tories switched to the party most likely to beat the SNP. While in Dumfriesshire, after a power cut and some emergency lighting, the Tories increased their vote at the expense of the Labour Party.
The Constitution was put front and centre in this campaign by the SNP and their desire to divide Scotland all over again. But Scottish Conservatives had a clear, ambitious plan for what we can do in the next Parliament if we can get rid of the threat of another independence referendum.
The SNP have made gains, but tactical voting by unionists in some of the key seats they hope to take means it now looks difficult, if not impossible, for them to achieve an overall majority. But with the addition of the Scottish Greens and the SNP, it seems clear there will be a pro-independence majority in the next Parliament. A feline interloper had to be carefully ejected from the count in Orkney. As the SNP held on to Airdrie and shots, Neil Gray's wife tweeted a request he bring home milk, and he did as he was told. Anis Sarwar has only been Scottish Labour leader for less than 3 months. In that short time, it appears he has not yet transformed Labour's really poor recent results.
Compared to where we were just 10 weeks ago when I took over this job, it's a magnificent turnaround. But I'm not pretending this journey is complete. I'm not pretending the project to change the Labour Party is complete.
Former First Minister Alex Salmond had hoped to make a comeback with his new Alapa party, but now admits they're unlikely to win a single seat. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Now, Alexander Mackenzie is at Holyrood for us this morning. Alexander, good morning to you. So when are we likely to know whether the SNP has hit that crucial number, that 65 seats for a majority?
Good morning, Naga. Well, that is the big question today, and we are likely to get an answer a bit later on. We keep hearing that it's very much on a knife edge. There are a total of 129 seats in the Scottish Parliament behind me now. 48 of these seats have already been declared. We're likely to get all the other results today. The SNP have got 39 seats so far. So far they haven't lost any of their seats. They've gained 2 from the Tories and 1 from Labour. But as Sarah said, they have missed out on a couple of seats that they were targeting. One of them, Dumbarton, which was the most marginal seat in Scotland. So because of that, it's possibly looking less likely that they may not get that overall majority, but we're not likely to know that until a bit later on. Nicola Sturgeon won her seat very comfortably in Glasgow's South Side yesterday, and she said she was looking forward to getting back to work. She also made reference to a possible second referendum, and she said she talked about a choice for a better future. But Boris Johnson in the Daily Telegraph today has said he is not going to change his mind. He's not going to grant that second independence referendum.
Indeed. OK, well, the conversations continue. Alexandra, thanks very much. And at 7:30, we're going to talk to one of the SNP's victorious candidates, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney.
Conversations continue. Counting continues as well. Across England, more results expected as well over the weekend. And Labour will be hoping for victories in the mayoral contests in London, Greater Manchester and the West Midlands after those bruising defeats yesterday.
Well, so far, the Conservatives have made significant gains, including taking Hartlepool from the opposition for the first time in more than 60 years. You saw that here on this programme yesterday. Now, the Prime Minister has called the results encouraging. Here's more from our political correspondent, Jessica Parker.
Look at this guy, he looks a bit like...
Boris Johnson popped up in Hartlepool yesterday in more ways than one. The Tories riding high after taking a seat that Labour had held for decades.
It's a mandate for us to continue to deliver, for not just for the people of Hartlepool, not just for the people of the North East, but across the whole of the country. The public want politicians to get on with focusing on their needs and their priorities.
It signalled the Conservatives taking another bite out of traditional Labour territory. So, a tough picture for Keir Starmer in his first big electoral test as leader.
Well, I'm bitterly disappointed in the results. And, you know, I take full responsibility for the results. And I will take full responsibility for fixing things. We have changed as a party, but we haven't set out a strong enough case to the country.
Can Labour take back towns like Hartlepool or look to break new ground? Big questions loom, with divided views on where the answers lie.
Underlying all this, and it's come up in your early report, is a disconnect, I have to say, between the middle class, more metropolitan side of our party, very much based in our cities, with London dominating, in fact, a couple of square miles in London of North London very often, with our more working class voters, and they are the bedrock.
Councils will continue counting today, with the Tories so far taking control of a handful of further authorities. The Greens have made some gains too in terms of seats, with the Lib Dems claiming pockets of progress. Mayoral and Police and Crime Commission accounts will also run on through the weekend. It really is a marathon, not a sprint. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
Well, in Wales, Labour are set to stay in power after matching their best ever Senedd election result by taking 30 of the 60 seats in the Welsh Parliament.
First Minister Mark Drakeford said his party had exceeded expectations after ending Friday just 1 seat short of a majority. Counting will continue today, as our Wales correspondent Thomas-Symonds reports.
After 22 years in charge, Mark Drakeford's Welsh Labour was predicted to be on the defensive in this election. But they've defied the polls and pundits, holding on to 27 constituency seats, the same result as 2016.
I will do whatever I can do to make sure that Wales has the government it needs, stable and progressive.
And like in England, it appears the UKIP vote here that led to them winning 7 seats 5 years ago has been split between Labour and Conservatives.
Well, thank you very much, returning officer.
The Tories have benefited by gaining 2 seats and Labour increased their share.
Mark Drakeford's Welsh Labour has very quietly subverted expectations of how well the party would be doing. It's not a repeat of what's happened in England. This is a very distinctly Welsh election, and it's not panned out as some might have thought.
Plaid Cymru will be licking their wounds. They've lost former leader Leanne Wood and failed to make any gains. Meanwhile, after losing their only constituency, the Lib Dems regained a regional seat. As Wales begins to return to some sort of normality, this year's result may have proven that Wales has been satisfied with Labour's stewardship throughout the pandemic and have voted for another round. Thomas Morgan, BBC News.
Hello there, good morning. You're watching Breakfast on Saturday morning with Naka Munchetti and John Kay.
Good morning to you. Just after 6:30. Now, thousands of votes are still being counted across Britain, with more results expected later. And in some cases, results will come through on Sunday and Monday.
There is no end to it. It just goes on and on and on. Plenty still to work through this morning. And Newsnight policy editor Lewis Goodall has his touchscreen ready to go.
Well, does he?
Yeah,
does he?
He has it ready to go, yeah?
I've given it a bit of jet fuel this morning. It's going to be absolutely fine. Yeah, absolutely. As you were saying, John, we're about halfway through the English councils. You can see there 86 of the 143 councils declared. Still lots of fun to go, and it's a real development this morning of what we were starting to see the early sort of contours of yesterday, which is a really stonking performance by the Conservative Party, up 159 seats, up to 1,387. The Labour Party down 192. As we were saying yesterday, this is an unusual picture. When you're in an 11th year of an administration, you would expect to see these two things inverted. For the opposition party to be making significant gains, for the governing party to be making significant losses. It isn't like that at the moment. Just two other things as well. Look at that. We were thinking about yesterday and talking yesterday, would there be a Lib Dem revival? So far, not much sign of it, down 24 overall. But the Greens are actually having quite a creditable performance so far in England, up 51 seats. Very, very happy with some of the things that are going on so far across the country. Let's just have a look at a couple of councils. Talking about that Lib Dem performance, Cornwall, they had high hopes down in Cornwall. Remember, the Lib Dems used to dominate in the West Country. They are going backwards really quite significantly. The Conservatives coming to absolutely dominate that council. Lib Dems losing 16 seats overnight there. And of course, one of the other things we were talking about after Hartlepool yesterday is how the Conservatives are doing in the North and Midlands. Another great example of how much progress the Conservatives are making in somewhere like Wakefield, for example. It's still a Labour council because Labour continue to dominate there and have so many of the seats. Only a third of the council seats were up for grabs, but the Conservatives making further inroads, 6 Conservative gains, 6 Labour losses. Ipswich in the east of England, a seat which the Labour Party had up until the 2019 general election. If they have any hope of returning to government, they have to win in Ipswich. They keep control of the council, Labour, but they've lost another 6 seats there and the Conservatives gain. But of course, it's not just about England, and we're going to be talking a lot today, I think, about Scotland. So what's going on there? Well, overall, it's quite static actually in Scotland. Most of the seats are just coming back as they did last time, back in 2016, mostly for the SNP. But there have been a few changes. We see there 3 SNP gains, 2 Conservative losses, 1 Labour loss as well. If we just dive into that in a little bit more detail, remember the SNP, they are looking, what they really want is 65 seats. 65 seats to get a majority overall. They needed about 6 marginal constituencies in order to achieve that. So let's have a look at some of them. We've got Edinburgh Central, for example. Very, very good performance by the SNP there. Angus Robertson takes Ruth Davidson's seat. Ruth Davidson, who was, until very recently, the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party. But then they start to come a little bit unstuck. And in seats like Dumbarton, that we saw yesterday, the Labour Party hangs on. And how do they hang on? And this is a story in across quite a bit of the various different seats across Scotland as well. Basically, there is a series of unionist tactical voting, Conservatives voting for the Labour Party in order to keep the SNP out. And as a result of that, in various constituencies across Scotland, it is looking less and less likely that the SNP will be able to get that crucial majority on their own. So they will be looking, for example, to the Green Party, who are also pro-independence, to help them govern and to agitate for, potentially, another independence referendum.
Lewis, thank you very much indeed. We'll catch up later.
It did work. It worked beautifully.
We've had words.
Just keep looking after it, Lewis. Be kind to it, and it will reward you.
Absolutely.
And if not, keep the receipt. 6:36. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Breakfast on Saturday with Naka Munchetti and John Kay.
Good morning. Our headlines today. The SNP wins key seats, but its hopes of winning an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament remain on a knife edge.
And what will this result mean for another Scottish independence referendum? We're at Guruk Outdoor Saltwater Pool to take the temperature and speak to people on both sides of the debate.
Counting continues in England. The Conservatives follow their by-election win in Hartlepool with more significant gains over Labour.
It's better news for Labour in Wales as it matches its best ever Senedd election result.
Holiday bookings surge as 12 countries are added to the UK's green travel list, but the industry says it's still too cautious.
Good morning. Talking of travel, Chelsea and Manchester City fans call on UEFA to move the Champions League final from Istanbul to England after being told they shouldn't go to Turkey, with the country now added to the government's red list.
And weather-wise, we're in the company of low pressure, introducing an unsettled story across much of the UK. But we'll also notice those temperatures rise. I'll return with all the details.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 8th of May. Our top story, the SNP's hopes of an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament still hang in the balance today.
Yes, with votes still being counted, the party needs another 26 seats to win total control. But two key targets of Dumbarton and Eastwood have been missed. Let's get all the details with our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
Angus Robertson, Scottish National Party, 16,276.
Every seat that has changed hands in Scotland has gone to the SNP, with a dramatic victory in Edinburgh Central, previously held by former Tory leader Ruth Davidson. They also took Ayr from the Tories and East Lothian from Labour.
Well done.
Nicola Sturgeon is confident she will win a mandate to hold another vote on leaving the UK and secure a remarkable fourth term in government.
If that is indeed the outcome of this election, I pledge today to get back to work immediately, to continue to steer this country through the crisis of COVID, to lead this country into recovery from COVID, and then, when the time is right, to offer this country the choice of a better future.
Voters who don't want independence appear to be using their votes tactically to back unionist parties. In Dumbarton, Labour held on as Tories switched to the party most likely to beat the SNP. While in Dumfriesshire, after a power cut and some emergency lighting, the Tories increased their vote at the expense of the Labour Party.
The Constitution was put front and centre in this campaign by the SNP and their desire to divide Scotland all over again. But Scottish Conservatives had a clear, ambitious plan for what we can do in the next Parliament if we can get rid of the threat of another independence referendum.
Anis Sarwar has only been Scottish Labour leader for less than 3 months. In that short time, it appears he has not yet transformed Labour's really poor recent results.
Compared to where we were just 10 weeks ago when I took over this job, it's a magnificent turnaround. But I'm not pretending this journey is complete. I'm not pretending the project to change the Labour Party is complete.
Former First Minister Alex Salmond had hoped to make a comeback with his new Alapa party, but now admits they're unlikely to win a single seat. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Let's go live to Holyrood, shall we, and speak to our correspondent Alexandra Mackenzie, who's there. And Alexandra, it matters so much, the SNP, doesn't it, what the figures are, what their majority is, because that's going to have an impact on a possible second referendum on independence.
Yes, good morning, John. Absolutely. Today is a big day for everyone, but especially for the SNP. The key figure is 65 out of 129 seats. That's what the SNP needs for an overall majority. And so far, 48 seats have been declared. So there's an awful lot of seats still to come today. And 39 have already gone to the SNP. They've taken 2 from the Tories and 1 from Labour, but they didn't win a couple of key seats that could be crucial for that overall majority. And other parties today, they'll start to pick up seats as we start to get results from the regional lists. The SNP are less likely, just because of the system, to get more seats from the lists. They are likely to get more from the constituencies, but there are more constituency seats to be declared today. Now, the Greens, they're likely to get most of, if not all of their seats from the list, and depending on how many seats they get, it is likely that there will be at least an independence majority within the Scottish Parliament. If not, that crucial overall majority for the SNP. As you say, that is on a knife edge.
Alexandra, another busy day for you. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the picture in Scotland. A majority for the SNP could bolster calls for another independence referendum. Let's talk to our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. Adam, morning to you. Hope you managed to get some sleep. Boris Johnson making very clear where he stands when it comes to Scottish independence.
Yeah, morning to you. Boris Johnson's done an interview with The Telegraph, I think while he was in Hartlepool yesterday, celebrating the Conservatives' victory in the by-election. And he says now is not the time for an independence referendum in Scotland, and he describes that as being a reckless thing to do. Notice he says not now, not ever. And the challenge for the Prime Minister when he responds to the final results in the Scottish Parliament later today is to sound like he is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom rather than the Prime Minister of England. And I just really remember being in Glasgow the morning after the independence referendum and David Cameron, the Prime Minister then, coming out of Downing Street and saying, right, that's enough of that. Now we've got to talk about this issue about making sure only English MPs get to vote on English laws. And that annoyed everyone in Scotland, whether you're in favour of independence or not. So that just gives you a bit of an idea of what these moments can feel like. Now, elsewhere in the United Kingdom, I think Labour will be hoping that they have a better day today, because today will be the day when they will do better, because we'll get the results of the mayoralties in Manchester, in London and in Bristol, where Labour are expected to win, and we'll get the final picture in Wales, where it looks like the Welsh Labour Party have managed to hold off challenges from the other parties, which may mean that Keir Starmer wakes up a little bit less sad today than he did yesterday.
Oh, OK. All right then, Adam, thanks very much.
Let's stay with what Adam was talking about there, Labour in Wales, because they're set to stay in power in the country after matching their best ever Senedd election results by taking 30 of the 60 seats in the Welsh Parliament.
Now, the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, said his party had exceeded expectations after ending Friday just one seat short of a majority. Counting will continue today.
Let's speak to our reporter Thomas Morgan. Thomas, a better result for Labour in Wales than was initially predicted. Why are people saying that that Labour have done better there?
A couple of reasons. Back in 2016, UKIP won 7 votes here, and that was just a few weeks before the Brexit vote in the UK, and Wales obviously voted to leave at that point. I think what's happened is the UKIP vote in Wales, unlike in England, has actually been split somewhat between Labour and the Conservatives. That's actually strengthened Labour's hold on number of seats, and even though they lost one of their constituency up north, they gained one in the Rhondda, gained as well in the regional list. So, as you mentioned, they're equaling their best ever result, really. Just one shy of majority now. You know, that talk of coalition with Plaid is almost certainly off the cards now, as they only need one more seat. The Liberal Democrats, who looked like they may be getting wiped out, losing their only constituency, actually gained late last night a regional seat. So, you know, one would potentially imagine that one option for Mark Drakeford, he said that he wanted a majority, really looks unlikely to get it himself, but potentially one could look at a deal with the Lib Dems, as the one seat there would take them over the threshold. The Tories really a good night for them, having taken some seats, extra seats, but really not really breaking through in that red wall area, just kind of cracking it a bit rather than really changing the colour of the red wall. And I suppose for Plaid, a poor night then for really losing their former leader, Leanne Wood, and not making any ground anywhere else there. Adam Price, few questions over his leadership now, but has said he will be staying firm.
OK, Thomas, for now, thanks very much. It looks like it's chucking it down there, is it already?
Yeah, it's beautiful Welsh weather here. I'm glad we're outside.
Stay dry. We'll get the weather forecast from Owain for the whole of the UK shortly, but I think there's a lot of rain coming in, isn't there?
Certainly is, but it's warmer, so that's better.
So it's looking you too.
Thanks very much. I noticed where you ended up. That's where we're going now.
We are. We're going to the west coast of Scotland, because it's looking cloudy and dry on your map there, but maybe that's perfect weather for a dip. Bit of an outside swim, fancy that?
I really don't think that's what Lorna has in mind this morning. Lorna Gordon, our Scotland correspondent, is up there in Gurk. But first, she's going to help us digest some election results this morning. Lorna, I'm saving you from taking a dip in the water because it does just look very, very cold, even though it's very, very beautiful there.
It's very beautiful here, but you know, actually, I did stick my hand in the pool this morning and it is surprisingly warm, so I might be tempted a little later on. But we are here to talk about the election, to talk about those results. They've been coming in. They will continue throughout the day. It looks like it's on a knife edge. Will the SNP win an outright majority, or will they have to combine with the Greens as a pro-independence bloc in the Scottish Parliament? Well, with me are two people to discuss the results. Shona Craven, who's a columnist at The National, and Daniel McCroskey, who is a Conservative advisor. Daniel, first, the results are on a knife edge, but it looks like the SNP will form a fourth government. People like what they heard.
Well, I don't know if they did, because the SNP were going for a majority at this election, and certainly from the results yesterday it looks like they may well fall short. Certainly that's what experts such as Professor Sir John Curtis are saying. So I think it's likely that they might not win a majority. Obviously there's still a couple of seats in play today. I think Aberdeenshire West being one of them, Galloway West Dumfries being another. Indeed, also some seats that the SNP hold that may still be up for grabs, like South Perthshire. So I think it's very much still in play, and I don't think a result can be predicted at this stage, although certainly most experts seem to think that they don't have an overall majority.
But the pro-union parties did not make, or have not so far made, any inroads.
Well, I mean, the pro-union parties have had a difficult challenge at this election, undoubtedly going against a leader who has had, you know, unlimited airtime during the pandemic, who's led the country. And as we see from south of the border, where Boris Johnson has led the UK Conservative, has led the country through the pandemic in England, his popularity has soared, as we've seen in some of the by-election and the election results recently in England. So I think the First Minister's had that benefit going into this election in Scotland. And certainly from our perspective as a Conservative party, our results are looking like they could be much better than we initially thought they might have been 6 months ago.
Shona, what did you make of what's happening so far in this election?
Well, as Daniel says, we can't actually call the result yet, because all eyes will be on the regional seats, which are very important, and there's a lot of unknowns around that. SNP have really pushed the both votes SNP line. Some people have said, well, there'll be wasted votes involved, but you can never tell when the votes will be wasted, because that all depends on the constituency outcome. And what we need to remember is that a majority at Holyrood is a very, very unusual thing. It's a towering achievement for any party to achieve, so it shouldn't be expected that anyone will get that, even though they might, you know, aspire to it.
And for those who don't understand the Scottish system, which is probably most people in Scotland as well, it is a very complicated voting system. I mean, the SNP picked up 2 seats yesterday, but actually that might mean they go down on the list today.
Yeah, and you can sort of see, depending on the angle of the commentary, people say, oh, it's bad times for the SNP that they've won this seat. And of course, it's not a bad thing to win any seat. It just has an implication for the list. But equally, to not gain a seat, it might mean getting a seat on the list in that area. So that's why it's too early to say. But also, there is no requirement on the SNP to achieve a majority in order to put into action their manifesto pledges if they can get the support of another party, which will probably be the equally pro-independence Greens.
The Prime Minister has already weighed in. He has written in the Telegraph this morning. He says he does not think this is the time to have more constitutional wrangling.
Well, he would say that. Of course, he wasn't bothered about having a dramatic constitutional change in the middle of a pandemic. He was fine with that. So it's no surprise that Boris Johnson would be coming out with that sort of line, and I don't think his line will be any different. He will make hay if the SNP do not get their majority, but as I say, that was always a very, very big ambition from them to begin with.
Daniel, the Prime Minister had made these comments this morning, but this has been his message throughout. This was his message at the beginning of the campaign as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, and it was the right message. I think it was right to not go absolutely hard on this line. I think this is the best approach that the Prime Minister can take, especially with what appears to be
But can he maintain that position, though? If there is a pro-independence majority with the SNP alongside the Greens, can the Prime Minister continue to say that there will not be another Scottish referendum?
The SNP said at this election that you require an SNP majority to deliver that referendum, not a pro-independence majority.
No,
in fact, you look at some of the polling, like the Lord Ashcroft polling, which shows that more than half of Green voters don't prioritise independence. So I don't think a pro-independence majority, as it's being put, of the SNP and the Greens necessarily means a guaranteed referendum. The SNP said that their argument this election was vote for us, we'll deliver a referendum on independence if we get that majority. They don't look like they're going to get that majority, and I don't think that therefore means that they've got a mandate for independence.
Shona?
No, I mean it's simply not correct. We can't just have this mandate inflation that you have to get a better and better result every time. When you had it in your manifesto, the SNP are the party of independence. Now, when the Conservatives got a majority, which is a much easier thing to do at Westminster, they had an EU referendum. Now, they're not the party of Euroscepticism. The SNP are the party of independence. So people do know what they're getting when they vote for the SNP, and in unprecedented numbers, they have done it. I think that's clear, regardless of whether there's a majority or not.
Very, very briefly, both of you, just in one word, if you can. If you were a betting person, will there be another referendum within the next 2.5 years?
Yes.
Absolutely not.
I wish I could ask you why, but we are out of time. Not entirely predictable answers there, I think, actually. Daniel McCroskey, a pro-union commentator, thank you very much for that. And Shona Craven from The National, which is a pro-independence paper. Thank you for joining us down here at Gurukpul. The swimmers will be coming in within the next hour or so. Because of COVID, of course, they have to block slots, but I think there can be, around 60 at any one time. And we think the pool is going to be busy, even if the sun doesn't shine.
Oh, I can see it just coming up over the hills there, the mountains. Thank you so much for now, Lorna. That's great.
Lorna might take a dip herself, you know.
She's so going to regret saying that, isn't she, on telly?
So
We'll make her.
It's 21 minutes past 7.
Good morning. Saturday morning, bit wet in places, but we're looking ahead to the weekend. Here on Breakfast with Nagaman Chetty and John Kay.
Good morning to you. Time now, it's just coming to 7:30. Good morning. Thousands of votes are still being counted across Britain, with more results expected later. In some cases, they'll come through on Sunday and Monday.
There is plenty to work through, and there's going to be plenty more over the next few hours. And Newsnight's policy editor, Lewis Goodall, has all the data loaded into his screen. Hi, Lewis.
Yes, Judge, let's take a look this time at Wales, shall we? Having looked at England and Scotland before. Wales, really, really fascinating. The Welsh government, we talk about the SNP having a long record in office in Holyrood in Scotland. This is nothing compared to Labour in Wales. They've been in office since the Welsh Parliament, the Welsh Assembly as it then was created back in 1999, and it looks like, in fact, it's absolutely certain that they are heading now for a fifth term of office. Here's the seats as we know. We've got 52 of the 60 declared, just a few left to go. The magic number you need really is 60 seats in the Senate. The magic number you need, because there's the presiding officer, is 30. And look, Labour are already there, 30 seats, up 1. Conservatives had a good night as well, by the way, at 12. Really good performance for them. Plaid, bit more disappointing. They were hoping for a breakthrough. They're down 1, but it's almost certain, well, it is certain really, that Labour, as I say, will be having a fifth term in office, so they'll be there for another 5 years. How did they do it? Well, partly they've done it as a result of making really big gains in places against Plaid Cymru. So we had this example here in the Rhondda in South Wales. So this was a seat that the Rhondda, their former leader Leanne Wood, took back in 2016 during the time of the last Welsh elections. Labour really absolutely storm it here. Majority of 5,497. Big increase in their share of the vote, up 19%. Really big swing. 19% swing from Plaid Cymru to the Labour Party. So impressive performance there. There was Labour were really worried going into this campaign because in Wales in the 2019 general election, the Tories did extremely well, particularly up in this corner here of North East Wales. Once we've heard a lot about the Red Wall in England. Well, there was the Red Wall as well in North Wales, and seat after seat after seat, whether it's Wrexham or the Vale of Clwyd or Delyn, seats like that in North East Wales fell to the Conservatives at the general election. And you can see here that the same thing happened here for the Senedd, but only in the Vale of Clwyd, where the Conservatives managed to take it. But in all those other seats like Wrexham, for example, didn't happen this time. The Labour Party hung on extremely well there, managed to actually increase their majority in a seat like Wrexham. Conservatives did all right. Plaid Cymru did okay, but only a tiny swing from Labour to the Conservatives of 0.3%. So that is how the Labour Party in Wales has hung on to its majority. And it's an interesting thing overall as well. If you look at what's happened over the course of this election, both in Wales and Scotland and in England, it seems that the incumbent party in each of those places, whether it's the SNP in Scotland, whether it's Labour in Wales, or whether it's the Conservatives in England, do seem to have done rather well. So there is a suggestion that perhaps there has been some sort of COVID incumbency effect where people have seen their ministers, whether it's in Wales, for example, notable how much better Labour have done in Wales by comparison to the rest of the country. Pretty much the only bright spot for the Labour Party is Wales. Perhaps they've seen Mark Drakeford, they've seen the minister, him as First Minister there. Polls do seem to suggest that they approve of his performance, and that seems to be roughly in accord with different parts of the UK. So who'd have thought it when we were talking about politics a year or so ago? There does seem perhaps to have been some sort of COVID incumbency bonus for the parties in the different parts of Great Britain in this election.
OK, Lewis, for now, later. We'll check in a bit later, yeah.
So it was a good day for the Scottish National Party yesterday. It's on course to form the government at Holyrood for a fourth consecutive term.
However, with plenty of votes still to be counted over the next few hours or so, we still don't know if it's going to be enough seats for an outright majority for the SNP or if they're going to have to form an alliance of some kind with a smaller party like the Greens.
Now, the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, who held his seat for the SNP, joins us now from Perthshire. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for your time with us this morning. Morning. Shall I start, first of all? Have you got in mind, has the SNP got in mind which party it would ally with if it needs one to make up a full majority?
We have to really see what the election outcome is as to what the arrangements will be post-election. It's very clear that the Scottish National Party is going to be the largest party in the Scottish Parliament by a very significant margin. We don't know whether we will have an overall majority yet. That will become clearer in the course of today, I would imagine. And that's an astonishing achievement for us, given the fact that we are now about to embark on a fourth consecutive term in government after 14 years and 3 terms of leading the people of Scotland. So I think we've had a tremendous success in the election yesterday. We'll see what comes in the course of today, but the signals are very good indeed. And obviously we'll then turn our minds to the arrangements post-election.
OK, if you win more than 65 seats, you'll argue perhaps, or will you be arguing still, that you have a mandate for a second independence referendum?
That will come down essentially to what is the electoral arithmetic of the Scottish Parliament. Will there be a majority of candidates who've been elected on a programme to deliver a referendum on independence? And that's the way democracy works, particularly in a Scottish Parliament where no party is supposed to end up with an overall majority. We have a proportional election system which is designed to avoid that situation happening. It's happened once before in 2011. It may happen again in the course of what we find out today. But I think what matters on the question you asked me about a mandate for a referendum is what is the position of those who are elected to the Parliament, and will there be an overall majority of members elected committed to the hosting of an independence referendum? And I'm very confident that will be the case.
Boris Johnson, you'll be aware of this, I'm sure, has told the Daily Telegraph newspaper he would reject any calls for a second referendum. He says that your party's wisely, used, quote, moving away from that idea. Is that correct?
Well, the fact that Boris Johnson tells something to the Daily Telegraph is hardly sensational news. It seems to be a kind of constant stream of consciousness. But the SNP has said that we will host a referendum on independence once we have got the COVID situation under control and once we are past the immediate risk of the pandemic. Now, the First Minister said in her response to her election result yesterday that she will be back to work on Monday, leading Scotland in tackling COVID. That is what we pledged to do in the election campaign. That's exactly what we will do. We'll get back to tackling COVID, as we have done during the election campaign, and make sure the leadership is there to keep our country safe and to build the recovery. But at the right moment, we will move on to having a referendum on independence. The people of Scotland look to me to have voted emphatically for that in the election. We'll need to see the precise electoral arithmetic around that point. but they've given an emphatic support to members of the Parliament committed to that objective.
Well, using the word emphatic is interesting because you failed to get two key target seats, though, Dumbarton, which was Labour, and Eastwood, which is Conservative. And some observers say that is because there was a reaction against the move towards a second referendum, and that there were unionists who actually voted, pro-union voters there, showed their hand, and that's why you failed to get that. Do you think there's a message that needs to be listened to as well?
Well, let's have a look at the statistics from yesterday and the outcomes. The SNP gained 3 seats yesterday. The Conservatives lost 2 and the Labour Party lost 1. That's the extent to which seats have changed hands in Scotland. The SNP's gained 3 and the Labour and Conservative Unionist parties have lost 3. So that rather suggests to me that the SNP did very well.
There were 2.
Everything else that we contested.
There were 2 that you were targeting, which were Dumbarton and Eastwood, which you didn't get. You know, yes, you got 3. You could have got more. This is the question I'm putting to you, that there were pro-union voters who were showing their hand and showing their objections to the SNP's commitment to another referendum.
Well, I completely understand the fact that there are people in Scotland that don't want there to be a referendum on independence, but there are many other people who do. And that's what democracy is designed to resolve. And what we'll find, I think, at the conclusion of polling day, whatever the precise composition, is that there will be a majority of members elected to the Scottish Parliament who will be committed to the hosting of an independence referendum. That's a fundamental democratic point. That's what the people of Scotland will have voted for. And Boris Johnson, to go back to your earlier question, should just accept democracy within Scotland, accept the fact that people in Scotland will have voted for that policy position to be taken forward after we've dealt with the immediacy of COVID, support us and take forward that referendum.
Sorry to interrupt. So do you genuinely think that people voted for the SNP because they wanted to vote for a referendum? They didn't vote for the SNP, say, for example, because of your policies or because of your handling of the pandemic?
Well, people will vote for political parties for a whole variety of different reasons. The same applies to any other political party. There will be a range of commitments. But central to our manifesto commitment was the proposition of there being a referendum on independence during this parliamentary term when we have the COVID situation that is in a more stable position. That was the position we took to the electorate. I'm confident that there will be a majority for such a proposition in the Scottish Parliament after the election. And at that stage, the democratic will of the people of Scotland needs to be acted upon, and Boris Johnson should support us in that process.
Tell me, if Boris Johnson blocks Scotland having a referendum, if he says no, will you legislate for one?
We've said that we will take forward the legislation to do so, to have a legal referendum, and we already have put in place some of the legislative arrangements for that process, and we will embark on such an agenda should there be a majority for such a proposition in the Scottish Parliament.
So you would legislate for one?
We certainly would, yes.
John Swinney, thank you very much, Deputy First Minister of Scotland.
It's 7:41. Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Naga Munchetti and John Kay.
Our headlines today. The SNP wins key seats, but its hopes of winning an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament remain on a knife edge.
Counting continues in England. The Conservatives follow up their by-election win in Hartlepool with more significant gains over Labour.
Good morning from the oldest warship still afloat in Europe. This is HMS Trincomalee. We're in Hartlepool, reflecting on an extraordinary set of election results here.
It's better news for Labour in Wales as it matches its best ever Senedd election result.
Holiday bookings surge as 12 countries are added to the UK's green travel list, but the industry says it's too cautious.
And weather-wise, we're in the company of low pressure, introducing an unsettled story across much of the UK. But we'll also notice those temperatures rise. I'll return with all the details.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 8th of May. Our top story is that the SNP's hopes of an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament still hang in the balance.
With votes still being counted today, the party needs another 26 seats to win total control. But two key targets of Dumbarton and Eastwood have been missed. Let's get all the details. Here's our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith.
Angus Robertson, Scottish National Party, 16,276.
Every seat that has changed hands in Scotland has gone to the SNP. With a dramatic victory in Edinburgh Central, previously held by former Tory leader Ruth Davidson. They also took Ayr from the Tories and East Lothian from Labour.
Well done.
Nicola Sturgeon is confident she will win a mandate to hold another vote on leaving the UK and secure a remarkable fourth term in government.
If that is indeed the outcome of this election, I pledge today to get back to work immediately, to continue to steer this country through the crisis of COVID, to lead this country into recovery from COVID, and then, when the time is right, to offer this country the choice of a better future.
Voters who don't want independence appear to be using their votes tactically to back unionist parties. In Dumbarton, Labour held on as Tories switched to the party most likely to beat the SNP. While in Dumfriesshire, after a power cut and some emergency lighting, the Tories increased their vote at the expense of the Labour Party.
The Constitution was put front and centre in this campaign by the SNP and their desire to divide Scotland all over again. But Scottish Conservatives had a clear, ambitious plan for what we can do in the next Parliament if we can get rid of the threat of another independence referendum.
Anis Sarwar has only been Scottish Labour leader for less than 3 months. In that short time, it appears he has not yet transformed Labour's really poor recent results.
Compared to where we were just 10 weeks ago when I took over this job, it's a magnificent turnaround. But I'm not pretending this journey is complete. I'm not pretending the project to change the Labour Party is complete.
Former First Minister Thomas-Symonds had hoped to make a comeback with his new Alapa party, but now admits they're unlikely to win a single seat. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
We're joined now by our political correspondent Nick Adley, who's at Holyrood this morning. Nick, we interviewed the SNP's John Swinney a little earlier, asking him how he sees the votes going.
Yeah, morning, Naga. How are you doing? It's interesting because John Swinney kept saying that it was there was still a while to go in this. He thinks that the SNP are going to be the biggest party, that's pretty much guaranteed. He thinks there'll be a pro-independence referendum, but he wasn't quite ruling out, was he, the idea that the SNP could maybe just sneak that majority, that magic number of 65. And there are a couple of ways they could do it. I've been working with my abacus all night trying to figure out how they could do it, and I think there are still a couple of ways, but it's going to be really hard, and they'd have to win some seats which don't look hugely likely at the moment. It's interesting because there's a couple of different interpretations. Let me show you a couple of the papers here in Scotland this morning. So, Daily Telegraph reckons that the majority is unlikely, but the pro-independence paper here, The National, thinks that yes is on track, and that's about the fact that if you add in the Greens, who are also pro-independence, there's going to almost certainly be a pro-independence referendum by the end of the day today. And then it all begs the question of what happens next. What do the SNP do? What does the Scottish Parliament do to try and secure another referendum? Boris Johnson says he's not going to allow one, but have a listen to John Swinney on what the SNP thinks about that.
What we'll find, I think, at the conclusion of polling day, whatever the precise composition, is that there will be a majority of members elected to the Scottish Parliament who will be committed to the hosting of an independence referendum. That's a fundamental democratic point. That's what the people of Scotland will have voted for. And Boris Johnson, to go back to your earlier question, should just accept democracy within Scotland.
So whether there's an SNP majority or not, if there is a pro-independence majority, it's going to continue to be a big issue in Scottish and in UK politics. I also thought it was really interesting in your interview, Naga, when you asked John Swinney whether they would legislate for a referendum in here anyway. He said yes, and it means that there could be a big legal battle over the next few years about whether another referendum happens. The issue of independence, SNP majority or not, is not going away.
Indeed. OK, well, there was lots of questions to be asked. Nick, keep that abacus to hand. You will need it.
Let's turn our attention to England now, south of the border, because more results expected Across the country over the weekend, Labour will be hoping for victories in the mayoral contests in London, Greater Manchester, Bristol, West Midlands, after some bruising, high-profile defeats yesterday. The Prime Minister has called results so far encouraging for the Conservatives after they made significant gains, including, of course, taking Hartlepool from the opposition for the first time in more than 60 years. Counting will resume today.
Labour also lost control of several councils and the Tories made gains. So what's behind the shift?
Let's speak to our political correspondent Chris Mason, who's in Hartlepool for us this morning, on board a ship. Explain, Chris.
Yeah, morning to you, John. This is HMS Trincomalee in Hartlepool at the Royal Navy National Museum here. It's an extraordinary boat, this. It's sailed 100,000 miles around the world. First sailed back in 1817. Never saw active service, which I guess is one reason why it's still afloat. The oldest surviving warship afloat in Europe. And you just think when you walk on board a boat like this, where has it been and what has it seen? The stories that that those who sailed upon it could tell you. Extraordinary stories here as well, as far as the local elections results are concerned. The by-election, the re-election of a Conservative mayor in the Tees Valley. Let's reflect on a few of the key themes really that are emerging as far as the picture more broadly in the north of England is concerned, and in particular on Teesside. We can talk to an undoubted expert from BBC Tees, David McMillan, political reporter from BBC Radio Tees. I was looking at these results yesterday. 73% the Conservative winner for the mayor of the Tees Valley. 73%. I was staggered by that. You were saying you weren't surprised.
Not entirely. I mean, 73 is an incredible result for anybody, but I was thinking it probably would come in at least maybe about sort of 2/3 to 1/3, maybe somewhere about 66 to 68%. I think it really emphasises something that people who aren't from this area of the Tees Valley should need to understand, is that the pivotal figure in politics here isn't Keir Starmer, it's not Boris Johnson, it is Ben Houchen, the Conservative mayor of the Tees Valley, and I think that result in the mayoral election yesterday emphasises that.
Why is it happening?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I mean, the Hartlepool by-election, people from outside have sort of talked about it being a shock, but it isn't really. There's so much going on here. The government's basically thrown a huge amount of stuff at the Tees Valley. There's the free port that they're creating, mostly over in Redcar, but touching on Hartlepool as well. They've moved Treasury jobs from Whitehall, or they're moving Treasury jobs from Whitehall to Darlington. So there is a lot going on here. So the Conservatives are very much in the ascendance in that sense. Labour, though, have got problems that stretch back a long way. It's not just about Keir Starmer, it's not just about Jeremy Corbyn. It's, goes back a long way. One of the things they find really hard to do is that, the government's austerity programme affected this region, but people seem to blame their local Labour politicians rather than the government for that.
Nice to see you, David. Thanks very much. Thanks for your analysis. Let's talk to a few people who, made it happen in terms of the by-election and how things are changing here politically. We can talk to Reverend Gemma Sampson first of all. Gemma, your reflections as we wake up in Hartlepool, Conservative MP here for the first time since the 60s.
Yeah, I am genuinely devastated. Really, truly I am. And that's because I just fear for the people who stand in line outside my church every Thursday waiting to be fed because they can't afford to heat their house, feed their kids. I'm just really worried for those who are most in need in the town.
Why should you be worried when the town has so clearly endorsed a Conservative MP and a Conservative mayor? People here believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the biggest shock for me is that the Tories weren't at 52%. So even if all of the other parties had clubbed together, it still would have been a victory. And I think that, for me, shows that Westminster are thinking about Westminster, and Hartlepool are hoping that that might impact on the town. And I hope that it does, but I fear that it won't.
Thank you, Gemma. We're going to have a quick word with a father and son combo. Let me introduce you to Scott and to Malcolm here. Scott first, you're a Conservative voter, aren't you? So did it surprise you what happened here?
No, I expected and hoped that was the way that it would turn out. And yeah, so that's positive for me.
Now here we've got something of a family divide because Malcolm, you're a traditional Labour voter. How are things, how do you reflect on this by-election and how you decided to vote in the end?
Well,
I suppose it's like for Hartlepool and the likes of a Labour, it stems back to your granddad, your dad, and it's passed on to you. You vote Labour because we're working class, etc., etc. And now we're getting to a stage where you can sort of think for yourself. We've had enough of Labour. They've just wrecked it. Everything.
Wrecked it?
Wrecked it. Totally. The hospital. We haven't even got a cell where we can lock someone up on a night. We haven't got a court where we can take them to court. Yeah. What's that all about?
We're a big town, aren't we?
Yeah. You know, you've got to have these facilities. Police. All the police have gone.
The hospital one's
they're
a one for us because we had the option to give birth to our second son in Hartlepool, but we decided against it because there's no doctors and no theatres, and sort of if there was anything went wrong, God forbid, we'd have had to go to North Tees. So that's just not the risk.
I was going to ask you about your new brood because you were telling me you've had a busy lockdown, haven't you, Scott?
Yeah,
you've had 2 children in the space of 1 pandemic.
That's right. Yeah, 3 lockdowns and 2 kids. So yeah, so it's been non-stop for us. But,
which is why 8:10 on a Saturday morning is not particularly early for you.
I've been up for hours. We just give up on sleeping.
Thank you both. Thanks for having us in your town over the last 24 hours. Thank you to all of you for your expertise this morning. We'll be back with more discussion on all things Hartlepool on this magnificent boat at around about 9:30.
It is magnificent. Chris, thanks very much indeed. 3 lockdowns, 2 kids and 1 magnificent boat. There you go. Only on breakfast on Saturday morning.
So you can hear there lots of disappointment with Labour in Hartlepool from Malcolm, you heard there. It's not the only key area that was lost. Sir Keir Starmer has said, who's the leader of the Labour Party, he takes full responsibility for the party's performance and he'll do whatever it takes to rebuild trust. How's the party going to move forward? Well, let's talk now to the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who joins us. Nick Thomas-Symonds, I don't know if you managed to catch much of what one of our guests there said. This was Malcolm in Hartlepool, obviously one of the key areas that Labour failed to hold on to. He was saying, just there, we haven't got a cell, a police cell, we haven't got a court. Labour has wrecked it. How does that make you feel?
Well, I couldn't catch all of what Malcolm said, but clearly I'm very concerned to hear his views, and it reflects really the devastating defeat that we've suffered in Hartlepool, and we have to respond now to that. Keir Starmer has started changing the Labour Party over the past 12 months. He now will be accelerating that process of change, and we have to look very deeply as to why it is that in Hartlepool, and I knocked doors in Hartlepool during the campaign, why it was that people didn't feel that Labour spoke to their priorities for the future. That is what we have to address. We can learn lessons too from around the country. Here in Wales, for example, where I'm speaking to you from, we had an excellent result yesterday where people clearly did feel that Labour spoke for the future. But what I want to see now is the Keir Starmer that I know. Keir's not had the chance to actually speak to a room of people over the past 12 months as leader of the Labour Party. And I know throughout his career, I was inspired to back him as leader of the Labour Party because of tackling injustice, tackling inequality. I'm looking forward to him now conducting that policy review and setting that out and trying to reconnect with people like those in Hartlepool that we've lost touch with.
What is the Labour Party changing into? Because that's what a lot of the voters say they just don't know. They just don't know what Labour stands for.
Labour's values will never change. We fundamentally and always will believe in building a more equal society where every single person in that society is valued for their contribution to it and what they bring to our society. So that will always be Labour's central values. But what we have to do is to reimagine
I genuinely don't know what that means.
How we put that into practice in the post-pandemic age. Well, let me give you a specific example about what that means. We have seen our frontline workers throughout the pandemic not actually now being rewarded for what they've done. They've put themselves on the line. They've gone to work day in, day out, and they've been rewarded with a pay freeze. That isn't valuing people's contribution and what they bring to our society. That isn't creating a more equal society. And that's one of the things that shows the difference in values between us and the Conservatives.
Yeah, but that's happened, and sorry for interrupting, and that's happened under a Conservative government, yeah? It's not a pay freeze, a 1% pay rise for NHS workers has been proposed. But the Conservatives have taken Labour seats.
Well, it is in effect a pay rise, and you take into account inflation and so on. But let me just address that point. You're putting your finger on precisely what we have to deal with. We have to ask ourselves why it is that people have not seen Labour as the answer to the problems they face in their everyday lives and the injustices we see. And that's my point about what's happened over the last 4 defeats in general elections, whether it's in Hartlepool, other places as well, where people do not now see Labour as answering those concerns. And that's now what we have to reflect on and why we have to change. Keir's started that process of change over the past 12 months, led very courageously on things like tackling anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. Now it's a question of moving on, having that review of our policies, economically setting out the difference, that we will not go back to the insecure economy of the past and reimagine our economy, and also make sure that we're changing our party so that our party is connected in communities up and down the country. That's the challenge, and we're determined to do it.
What do you think of the assertion that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party has focused too much, say, on internal politics or attacking the Conservative Party rather than putting a message across to the voters that they matter more than politics?
I think we certainly have to speak to the country, absolutely. But as in most things in politics, it's about a balance. We absolutely have to hold the Conservatives to account. When you think about the cronyism in the contracts,
the Prime Minister. Right?
Hang on. The Prime Minister, who actually won't even tell us who paid an invoice for the redecoration of his flat and lacks that fundamental transparency. Those are things we absolutely have to continue to hold the government to account on. Now, coming to that point about balance, obviously we need to now, to a far greater extent, set out our vision for the future. We've been right, and Keir has been right, in the pandemic to offer constructive opposition, to support the government when it gets things right, like on the furlough scheme or on the public health messaging. That was in the national interest. We've called out the Tories when they got things wrong as well. But as we move out of the pandemic, we will then be setting out, to a far greater extent, our vision of the future. And it'll be informed by Keir's values, the Keir that I know that has spent his life tackling inequality, tackling injustice. And I'm looking forward to him doing that in the months and years ahead, so we have a radical, credible offer to put to the electorate at the next election.
The Shadow Defence Minister, Khalid Mahmood, has quit after saying that Keir Starmer's front bench, and he's accused them of being the London-based bourgeoisie, who he says have taken over the party with the support of brigades of woke social media warriors. Is it time for a Labour shadow cabinet reshuffle?
Well, firstly, Khalid actually left the front bench 4 weeks ago. I don't agree with his interpretation, actually. However, I do think that we need to change. Keir has started that process. He will now be accelerating that process. In terms of a reshuffle, that's always an issue for the leader of the party, and it's an issue for Keir, who he wishes to have serving in his shadow cabinet. But there is a wider, more fundamental issue here that we are talking about. When we've lost connection with the people in Hartlepool in the way that we have, and indeed in other parts of the country, what we've got to do is something far more fundamental, which is reimagining that policy offer that we want to put forward that will make a difference to people's lives in the post-pandemic age. And that's what we will be concentrating on in the months ahead.
What's Mark Drakeford got, considering his success with Labour in Wales, that Keir Starmer hasn't?
I don't think it's a question of one having qualities that the other lacks. I think they rather complement each other very well.
It's reflected in the numbers, isn't it?
Well, I think what it shows in the numbers, by the way, in Wales, is that we can learn lessons from here in Wales. Here in Wales, Welsh Labour is embedded in communities up and down Wales. And we had, firstly, Mark Drakeford's leadership during the pandemic, his careful leadership that's been so important, but also Welsh Labour offering that vision for the future, living wage for carers, jobs guarantee for young people, which is something, by the way, that Keir has spoken out in favour of as well, whether it's building low carbon homes. So yes, absolutely, the model that we have here in Welsh Labour is something that we can very much build on at a UK level going forward.
Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomas-Symonds, thank you very much for your time with us on Breakfast this morning.
Let's look in a bit more detail, shall we, at the situation in Wales, because Labour, as we were just discussing there, set to stay in power in Wales after matching their best ever Senedd election results by taking 30 of the 60 seats in the Welsh Parliament.
Yeah, and the First Minister Mark Drakeford said his party had exceeded expectations after ending Friday just one seat short of a majority. Counting will continue today.
Yeah, let's check in with Thomas Morgan, who joins us now from a wet Cardiff this morning. And a much better result for Labour than even they were predicting. Let's stay with that theme. What did they get right in Wales? Why has it worked there?
I think Mark Drakeford's definitely going to get some plaudits. I think it's interesting to see what Lee Waters said, the re-elected Llanelli member of the Senedd. He said that Drakeford was definitely an asset on his ticket. He may come across as a bit nerdy, he may come across as a bit boring, a bit professor-like, but thank God for him was the words Lee Waters used. I think throughout the pandemic, never before has a First Minister had such recognition. The pandemic has thrust the home nation leaders to the forefront of the minds of the Welsh public, really. And I think on the whole, we had seen polls that suggested that the Welsh public favoured the way Mark Drakeford was dealing with the pandemic compared to Boris Johnson over the border, really. So no doubt that has had an impact here, a strong there for them. The other thing, as I mentioned a bit earlier, if you remember back in 2016, the vote in Wales took place just a few weeks before the EU referendum, and Wales was the only other nation that actually voted to leave the EU, and UKIP got 7 seats here in Wales. So that vote in Wales has been, the UKIP vote has been spread between Labour and the Tories. So the Labour vote here has gone up as a share, and they've strengthened themselves in their stronghold here. The Tories have made some ground, but they haven't been able to really break down that red wall in the north east of Wales. The only other mention I should say as well is for Plaid Cymru losing their former leader Leanne Wood in the Rhondda. Labour taking that a really strong result for them, really. So question marks over Adam Price's leadership, but really I think it comes down to Welsh Labour putting Mark Drakeford front and centre of that campaign, showing that he is a strong, stable leader for Wales, and it looks like that strategy has paid off for them.
Interesting. Thomas, thank you very much indeed. $8:30 Saturday morning. Thanks for joining us on Breakfast with Naga and John today.
Good morning to you. Thousands of votes are still being counted across the UK, with more results expected later, and in some cases they'll come tomorrow and on Monday.
And there is plenty to work through, lots of numbers, and the man who's going through all the data is Newsnight's policy editor, Lewis Goodall, with his touchscreen. Morning, Lewis.
Morning, John. Yeah, I think given we've been talking about Scotland and what's going to happen now with regards to another independence referendum, might just be worth looking at it in a little bit more detail and specifically address the question, can the SNP still get to the magic number, which is 65? That's the number that they said that they will need for a majority on their own, something that they dearly wanted. Well, let's be clear. It's been a very good night for the SNP. They're clearly going to form the next government. They're going to have another term in office after 14 years. They have won 3 additional constituency seats. If you see the map of Scotland's a bit small there, but you can still see there's still some to be filled in. We've got 48 of 129 seats to come, some of which are constituency seats. The SNP will take most of those. But in order to get to 65, they needed to effectively take about 6 of the really marginal constituencies. Well, they've done some of that. They've taken Ayr, good as it goes. East Lothian, they took from Labour. Edinburgh Central, they took from the Conservatives. But after that, they started to run into some difficulty. They didn't take Dumbarton, their top #1 target. Very small majority for Labour's Jackie Baillie. They didn't take it. They didn't take Dumfriesshire. That was a Conservative hold. They didn't take Eastwood. Again, narrow Conservative hold. That doesn't leave them much to play with. It really doesn't. In order to have any hopes of getting to 65, that means they must now take both Galloway and Aberdeenshire West. Now, what is the problem with doing that? Well, the problem is that they need quite a considerable swing in these constituencies in order to get there. And the problem is in the other constituencies, the other Conservative-held constituencies of Eastwood, they actually had a pretty small swing to them, or a small swing away from them. So have a look at here. In the seat of Dumfriesshire, there was actually a swing away from the SNP to the Conservatives of 3.3%. There was a swing to the Conservatives in Eastwood of 0.4%. The problem with that is, if you compare to what happened, what they need in Galloway, for example, they need about 2% swing in Galloway in order to take that seat. That's obviously much smaller, or much bigger than the swing required that they had in the other seats. And if we have a look again in Aberdeenshire West, again, they need quite a swing, a bigger swing here than that they've achieved in the Conservative constituencies, which have already been held. So the problem is these are difficult seats for them to win by comparison to the Conservative-held seats that they've already had. So it's a really difficult thing. They're going to have to, in order to get that 65, they're going to have to take Aberdeenshire West, they're going to have to take Galloway, and even then they would need to take a seat on the regional proportional list in the Highlands and Islands. It is possible. They could still do it, but it is a narrow and it is a tortuous path for them. Very, very difficult indeed. It looks more likely that they're going to get very close to that magical line of 65, maybe get up to 63, who knows, maybe even up to 64, probably around 62 or 63, but not to 65, which means that there will be, very likely, with the Greens, the Scottish Greens, who are pro-independence as well, it does mean that there will be a pro-independence majority in Holyrood, but less likely to be an SNP only one, which some people say will allow Boris Johnson, make it a little bit easier for Boris Johnson to try and avoid the question of another independence referendum.
Lewis, good stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Catch up later.
So it was a day of historic victories in Labour's former heartlands yesterday, as you were hearing. The Conservatives making major gains across England following Thursday's bumper set of elections.
And on it goes, counting still happening, including in Wales and in Scotland, as Lewis is saying, where a strong performance for the SNP will bolster those calls for a second vote on independence, whether they get an overall majority or not. Let's speak to the Environment Secretary in Westminster, George Eustice. Thanks for joining us on Breakfast this morning, Mr. Eustice. It's easy to focus on your victory in Hartlepool, which was clearly historic. But when you zoom out and look at that bigger picture, particularly at Scotland and the Conservatives' failure, really, to make the progress that you might have done in Scotland, allowing the SNP, it seems, to form some kind of majority, you must be less satisfied.
Well, look, we are a party and a government that believes passionately in the union. The UK, it's the most successful union in history. We've had a shared endeavour for hundreds of years, and we desperately want to make sure that the UK union stays together. That's why we're trying to improve the way that policies are coordinated across the UK. Why we want to make sure that, having left the EU, every part of the UK benefits from the new freedoms that we gain and the new policy areas where we can exercise judgment, and also that we have that ability to be able to work right across the UK, fund projects across the UK as the UK government, and that's what we're seeking to do. We really need to take this opportunity to rebuild the cohesion and the purpose of the UK union.
But with the SNP looking like it's going to be returned to power in Scotland, either on its own with an overall majority or in coalition, that union of the United Kingdom is looking more precarious, isn't it, this morning?
Well, that is why the government has got a lot of policies here to really try to strengthen the union, to make sure that every part of our kingdom has economic growth and prosperity, to make sure that there are areas where we work together and improve policy coordination and don't just have this approach where if a policy's devolved, then it's completely left go and we don't even work together in partnership. We should do. So we're looking at lots of areas like that. But look, there was also a referendum that took place just a little over 5 years ago. That was described as a once-in-a-generation opportunity for people to debate these issues, and they did. And I think as we try to now come out of the pandemic and get economic recovery going as we come out of the pandemic, it's the wrong time to have yet another divisive referendum and yet another bout of constitutional argument on a matter such as this.
But since that last independence referendum, there has been Brexit, hasn't there? And Scotland overall voted to remain in the European Union. And you could say that that is a fundamental change in British politics, and it's right to throw it back to the people of Scotland whether they want independence. I mean, John Swinney told us here on Breakfast this morning from the SNP that it's a fundamental democratic point to allow at least a referendum. I mean, it's hard for a Prime Minister who's only in his job because of a referendum on Brexit to deny the people of Scotland a referendum if that's what they voted for, isn't it?
Well, look, they weren't denied a referendum. We had a referendum, as I said, 5 years ago. And I think the important thing is now that we've left the European Union, and yes, that was quite a divisive debate. There's no, getting away from that. But it does mean that in whole swathes of policy area, particularly the ones I deal with on the environment, on animal welfare, on agriculture and fisheries policy, there's now more power going to Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland than they've ever had before. Areas of policy that have been really occupied in an EU competence over the last 40 years, 50 years, are now policies that the devolved administrations will be able to exercise judgment on. And I think that's going to be, really important. So we need to see how things bed down. And I think it's just the wrong time to be having another referendum on Scottish independence.
John Swinney from the SNP told us that even if Boris Johnson doesn't agree to a referendum, that the SNP in Holyrood will begin the process of trying to do it through law, trying to legislate to allow it to happen. How far would you be prepared to go to stop it? I mean, could this end up in the courts?
Well, look, I'm not a lawyer. Lawyers will look at these things, and I think it's getting ahead of ourselves. We'll have to see how the results pan out later today. It's questionable at the moment whether the SNP will get a majority or not. We'll have to wait and see till the results come through. The UK government's position is very clear on this. We don't think there's a case for another referendum, particularly now as we try to chart a way out of the pandemic and get our economy going again. But we will obviously deal with whatever we have to deal with once these elections are settled and once the new Scottish administration decides what it wants to do.
I was really struck hearing from a breakfast viewer, Malcolm, in Hartlepool, who was talking to our correspondent Chris there about half an hour or so ago. And he said that he'd voted for the Conservative candidate, who indeed then won, because he wanted more police officers on the streets of Hartlepool. He wanted better medical care. He wanted a hospital. He wanted a court back in the town. He has really high expectations that you now are going to deliver for Hartlepool and places like that. And that's going to cost an awful lot of money as well as political interest, isn't it? I mean, the expectations that you're dealing with are enormous and quite dangerous for you if you fail to deliver.
Well, it's a very important responsibility that we have. Parts of the country that haven't voted Conservative before, or at least for decades in some cases, are now putting their trust in this Prime Minister and this government. And yes, that's a big responsibility on us. We can't let people down. That's why the Prime Minister has put so much emphasis on levelling up, making sure that we have balanced growth in this country, making sure that those areas that were in some ways left behind after they lost their manufacturing industry and have struggled in recent decades actually get new industries, better paid jobs, better infrastructure, and that's exactly what we will be trying to deliver in the years ahead. It's a big responsibility for us. We don't take at all for granted that these people have put their faith and confidence in us, and we intend not to let them down.
Yeah, but it's also going to cost a huge amount of money, isn't it, at a time when you've already spent billions and billions on furlough and dealing with the pandemic. And for every person who wants you to spend in places like Hartlepool, there are other people who are saying, hang on a minute, you can't keep spending money like this. It's going to catch up with us sooner or later. It's not responsible.
Well, look, of course, yes, we've had to spend quite a lot of money on the pandemic, and there are challenges, but we do also have plans for quite an active regional policy, in that we've got a community renewal fund that's already been announced, and we are piloting ideas for a new shared prosperity fund. That's been government policy. It was in our manifesto. We want to make sure that we get more balanced growth in our country. We can't have the situation we've had in recent years, where all of the growth has been in London and the city and the southeast, and it's been a sort of country of two halves in many ways. We can't have that. We need the whole country, every part of our United Kingdom, to share in the prosperity and economic growth that we're trying to achieve.
OK, from a country of two halves, let's talk about a game of two halves, shall we? And football. I know the Prime Minister was only too keen to wade into the Super League debate a couple of weeks ago. So what about this question about where the Champions League final should be held? It's due to be in Turkey, but two English sides taking part who can't now go to Turkey. The fans can't go to Turkey to watch. So doesn't it make sense for the Prime Minister to say, OK, can we host it here instead, please, at home?
Well, I understand that discussions are ongoing with UEFA. It is a decision, I think, that UEFA would take. But I think that Oliver Dowden in the Department for Culture and Media is looking at this issue. The UK, I think, has made this offer that we could host it here, but it will ultimately be a decision for UEFA. It is regrettable that we've had to put Turkey on the red list, but we do have to make these judgments based on the science and the risk in individual countries.
So that is a formal offer that's gone into UEFA, is it? Saying, you know, we are prepared to and happy to host it here?
My understanding is that there have been some discussions, and that I think that the Football League here in England have made that offer, and there are some discussions with UEFA about whether that would be a possibility. But it will ultimately, I think, be a final decision for UEFA.
Can I just ask you about pet passports? We're getting through all sorts this morning, aren't we? But in terms of protecting pets, because we've been dealing with this morning, hearing the heartbreak from some pet owners about dog thefts in particular, the demand for pets in the last year or so. What can you as a government do to make pet owners and pets themselves safer?
Well, there has been some worrying trends here, although the data is difficult to get a handle on. Most of the estimates that we have from reports suggest that pet theft may have perhaps doubled in the last 12 months. Some put it even higher than that. Demand for pets has risen. In some ways, that's understandable. People have been spending more time at home, often perhaps suffering from loneliness, and so they've sought to get a pet. But what has been worrying is that there do appear to be a rise, sometimes, of organised gangs stealing pets in order to sell them. That's why we've set up a pet theft task force. It's going to, first of all, get to grips with the data so we can understand the scale of the problem, but also see if we can improve coordination and intelligence sharing between police forces. There have been some successful raids and operations in places like Hertfordshire and Essex, and we want to learn from those successes to make sure we can catch those involved with this terrible crime, which causes a huge trauma for people.
It does. We've been hearing that trauma this morning. George Eustice, thanks for joining us on Breakfast.
Thank you very much.
8:45 is the time.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Breakfast this Saturday with Naga Munchetti and John Kay.
Our headlines today. The SNP wins key seats, but its hopes of winning an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament remain on a knife edge.
What will this result mean for another Scottish independence referendum? We're at Gourock Outdoor Pool. It only reopened yesterday after COVID restrictions, and the water here is heating up at the same time as the political debate heats up. We'll be speaking to people on both sides of the independence divide.
Meanwhile, counting continues in England. The Conservatives following up their by-election win in Hartlepool with some other significant gains over Labour.
Good morning from the oldest warship still afloat in Europe. This is HMS Trincomalee in Hartlepool as we reflect on an extraordinary set of election results here.
It's better news for Labour in Wales as it matches its best ever Senedd election result.
Holiday bookings surge overnight as 12 countries are added to the UK's green travel list, but the industry has told us it's too cautious.
Good morning. Talking of travel, Chelsea and Manchester City fans call on UEFA to move the Champions League final from Istanbul to England after being told they shouldn't go to Turkey, with the country now added to the government's red list.
And weather-wise, we're in the company of low pressure, introducing an unsettled story across much of the UK. But we'll also notice those temperatures rise. I'll return with all the details.
Good morning. It's Saturday, the 8th of May. Our top story is that the SNP's hopes of an outright majority in the Scottish Parliament hang in the balance.
Yeah, with votes still being counted today, the party needs another 26 seats to win total control. But two key targets of Dumbarton and Eastwood have been missed. Let's speak to our political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who's at Holyrood this morning and tells us he's been up all night with his abacus. What have you managed to assess, Nick, about how this is looking?
Well, look, I mean, in terms of an SNP majority, it's pretty tight. It could come down to one seat. Some in the SNP still think it's possible. We had the Deputy First Minister, John Swinney, on earlier saying that he's not ruling it out just yet, but it is going to be difficult. We probably won't know until later this afternoon. But what does look more likely is that there will be a pro-independence majority in this place, because when you add in the Green Party, who are also pro-independence, you're going to get probably close to, if not above, the 70 out of 129 MSPs. And that raises the big question about whether there's going to be another referendum. Let me show you the way a couple of Scottish papers are translating the results so far. So the Daily Telegraph is saying that the Sturgeon majority is unlikely. The National, which is the pro-independence paper up here, is saying yes, on track. So it's glass half full, glass half empty for the independence movement, depending on how you look at it. It all raises the question of what happens next. And when John Swinney was on breakfast earlier, Naga asked him about what the result would mean if there is a pro-independence majority.
What we'll find, I think, at the conclusion of polling day, whatever the precise composition, is that there will be a majority of members elected to the Scottish Parliament who will be committed to the hosting of an independence referendum. That's a fundamental democratic point. That's what the people of Scotland will have voted for. And Boris Johnson, to go back to your earlier question, should just accept democracy within Scotland.
So that's the SNP view. They've also said that they'll pass legislation in Holyrood for another referendum, which means there could be a big political battle over the next few years on independence, potentially a big legal battle as well. The counting here gets underway again at 9 o'clock. I think it's going to be into the afternoon before we get the key results. It could be this evening before we know the final picture, but we'll have it all on the BBC.
You will. Another busy day. Nick, thank you very much indeed.
So that's the picture in Scotland. A majority for the SNP could bolster calls for another independence referendum. Let's talk to our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. Adam, morning to you. So this referendum issue isn't going away, is it, for Boris Johnson? He's made clear he's not up for it.
Yeah, he's given an interview to The Telegraph saying that no, it's not the right time for an independence referendum and it would be an irresponsible thing to do. The big challenge for the Prime Minister when he responds to these results for the Scottish Parliament is how does he look like he's the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom rather than just the Prime Minister of England? And from his point of view, how does he react in a way that doesn't actually strengthen the SNP's case and their argument that he's anti-democratic? And we got a little bit of a sense of what the Prime Minister might say later from the Environment Secretary, George Eustice.
See how the results pan out later today. You know, it's questionable at the moment whether the SNP will get a majority or not. We'll have to wait and see till the results come through. The UK government's position is very clear on this. We don't think there's a case for another referendum, particularly now as we try to chart a way out of the pandemic and get our economy going again. But, you know, we will obviously deal with whatever we have to deal with once these elections are settled and once the new Scottish administration decides what it wants to do.
a little clue at the end there that this is not an issue that's going to be settled today or this weekend. It's going to rumble on for weeks, months, and maybe even years. And in terms of other things rumbling on, there are still more election results to come in England. And we'll also get some places where things should go a bit better for Labour than they did yesterday. So, for example, the mayors in Manchester, in London and in Bristol, where Labour will do much better than they did in English local authorities yesterday. But there's still a quite big row going on in the party about how to respond to all of this. One of Keir Starmer's allies is the Shadow Home Secretary, Nick Thomas-Symonds, and he gave us an idea about what Keir Starmer's thinking is about how to try and rescue the situation for Labour.
What I want to see now is the Keir Starmer that I know. Keir's not had the chance to actually speak to a room of people over the past 12 months as leader of the Labour Party. And I know throughout his career, I was inspired to back him as leader of the Labour Party because of tackling injustice, tackling inequality. I'm looking forward to him now conducting that policy review and setting that out and trying to reconnect with people like those in Hartlepool that we've lost touch with.
So it sounds like one of the big things Labour is planning to do is this policy review, where they just look at all their policies on everything, work out if they're the right ones, and then come up with new ones if they feel they've got to replace some of them. And the problem with that, though, is that will annoy members of his own party who are in favour of some things and opposed to others, which means the next few months for Labour might be dominated by another internal row. And as long as Keir Starmer is spending time winning that argument, he's not spending time winning over the country.
That is the issue, isn't it? OK, well, Adam, we'll be watching closely. Thanks so much, Adam Fleming there.
Excuse me. Labour are set to stay in power in Wales after matching their best ever Senedd election results by taking 30 of the 60 seats in the Welsh Parliament.
Now, First Minister Mark Drakeford said his party had exceeded expectations after ending Friday just one seat short of a majority. Counting continues today, as our Wales correspondent Thomas Morgan reports.
After 22 years in charge, Mark Drakeford's Welsh Labour was predicted to be on the defensive in this election. But they've defied the polls and predictions, equalling their best ever result with 30 seats, just one shy of a majority.
I will do whatever I can do to make sure that Wales has the government it needs, stable and progressive.
And like in England, it appears the UKIP vote here that led to them winning 7 seats 5 years ago has been split between Labour and Conservatives.
Well, thank you very much, returning officer.
The Tories have benefited by gaining 2 seats and Labour increased their share.
Mark Drakeford's Welsh Labour has very quietly subverted expectations of how well the party would be doing. It's not a repeat of what's happened in England. This is a very distinctly Welsh election and it's not panned out as some might have thought.
Plaid Cymru will be licking their wounds. They've lost former leader Leanne Wood and failed to make any gains. Meanwhile, after losing their only constituency, the Lib Dems regained a regional seat. As Wales begins to return to some sort of normality, this year's result may have proven that Wales has been satisfied with Labour's stewardship throughout the pandemic and have voted for another round. Thomas Morgan, BBC News.
(9:31) Saturday morning breakfast from BBC News. Thanks for joining Naga and John today.
Good morning to you. Thousands of votes are being counted across Britain, with more results expected later today. Some cases they'll be coming tomorrow and through on Monday.
And Lewis Goodall's computer is steaming with all that information and data that he's loaded in. What can you show us, Lewis?
Yeah, it certainly is, John. Well, let's have a look. We've spoken about what's happened already over the last 24 hours. Let's have a think about what's going to happen for the rest of the day, because we still have loads of fun to come. Lots of counts still being done. In England, for example, let's have a look at this. We've had 7 gains for the Conservatives so far. Labour have gone down by 4, but a few to keep an eye on throughout the course of the day. Lancashire, for example, this was a county council that the Conservatives currently hold. They've got 45 seats to Labour's 30. It's the sort of council where if Labour were progressing, if Labour looked like they were on their way to form a government at the next general election, they should be doing really well in somewhere like Lancashire. If the rest of the seats are anything to go by, and it is true that Labour have been doing a little bit better, not much, but a little bit better in the northwest than they have been in the northeast. But if generally the performance is anything to go by, we would expect the Conservatives to actually be making advances in Lancashire County Council. Something to keep your eye on as well, a story that we haven't spoken about as much, is that the Lib Dems had really hoped to be making some real progress in this election. Obviously, it's been a really baleful period generally for them. So far, they've been going backwards. Somewhere to keep an eye on is Wokingham. Again, they should be making some progress there, but if results are anything to go by in the rest of the country, that isn't necessarily the case. Something that will be getting a lot of attention over the course of today, though, is the London mayoralty. It is not a contest we've spoken a lot about during the election campaign, because it has been received wisdom that Sadiq Khan has it in the bag, that if anywhere is a Labour heartland these days, then it is the London mayoralty. Of course, though, it does look from some of the results that we've had in so far that in actual fact, some of the results show that the Conservatives are doing a little bit better. Sean Bailey doing a little bit better by comparison to what we'd expected, so up by about 2%, Labour down by about 1%. That's for the London Assembly there, but generally speaking for the mayoralty itself, also doing quite a bit better as well. And then if we think about Scotland as well, Scotland, we also for the rest of the day will have the regional seat results as well. This is the current situation for them, +3 for the SNP. Lib Dems currently are basically on almost nothing at all, but we'll have the regional list for the rest of the day coming in places like North East Scotland. These are the constituency top-up lists from the constituencies. It makes the system a little bit more proportional. If you haven't done as well in the constituencies, then you get topped up on the list system. Well, in North East Scotland, we'll be keeping an eye on that. We've only had 4 out of 10 declared so far, so still lots to come in, but we'll be keeping an eye on that, not least because we'll be seeing whether the Alba Party, led by Thomas-Symonds, whether he manages to get into the Scottish Parliament. So far, on the basis we've only had 4 out of 10, so far it doesn't look like it, because he's only on about 2% for the Alba Party. They'd need to be on about 5-6% to be guaranteed a seat. So lots more very exciting results to come, John.
OK, we'll take your word for it. Thank you very much.
It's very exciting.
It is. It is very exciting, yes, still.
The ballot papers from the various elections in England, Wales, Scotland, they're still being counted. And we are dipping into each of those counties for some analysis.
Quite literally dipping.
There
we
Look
go.
at that. Now,
let's head to Scotland.
That is Gurrock on the west coast, and Lorna Gordon, our Scotland correspondent, is out there, and she did say she'd put her hand in the water. She's not one of our bravest correspondents this morning, and said it was quite warm. Lorna, don't fancy it, no?
I am not brave. Not brave at all, I'm afraid, but it is heating up, and it will reach 28, 29 degrees when it's fully reheated after being closed for COVID. I'm told today it's at about 25 and rising, but it's not putting off these swimmers, is it? These are members of Inverclyde Masters Swimming Club, and look at them go. So impressive. Of course, we're not down here today to talk about the swimming. We're down here to talk about the election results. And we've got 4 voters down with us here today. Thanks very much for joining us. We'll start with you, Susanna. I mean, this was a campaign that was fought on post-COVID recovery and the Constitution. What was the big issue for you out of those?
Well, I will admit that I did stumble slightly. I'm an SNP supporter, but the way that childminding has been dealt with over the last year has been quite problematic for me, and I know that many of my colleagues over Scotland have really struggled. When I looked at that and I had a rethink, what I had to think was for the bigger picture for Scotland.
You weren't sure about voting SNP then?
No, because of the way that childminders have been treated and marginalised within the early years sector, I did have second thoughts. But then when I looked at the wider picture for Scotland and what I want for my daughter as she moves forward in her life, I want it to be a free and independent Scotland.
So do you think ultimately then a vote for the SNP was a vote for independence, or do people actually vote for them for other issues as well?
I think a vote for the SNP really was validation in the way that they have dealt with COVID on the whole. I do think that the referendum is a different issue. You'll have a vote in the referendum and then you can decide, and I'll use my democratic right to vote then.
OK, thank you for that. Greg, can I ask you, how did you vote then, Greg McLeod?
Tactically.
Interesting, a tactical voter. In favour of independence, against independence?
Against independence.
Why is that?
Because I don't want SNP to have any power.
There appears to have been a lot of tactical voting this time around in Scotland. If you look at areas like Banff and Buchan Coast, Dumbarton, you know, there do seem to have been people who've switched party because of this issue. Is that the sense you're getting amongst the people you know?
So, yeah. Yes.
The SNP argue that a majority of pro-independence parties in the Parliament is a mandate for another referendum. What do you think of that?
I think if they have another referendum, it should be based on a 60% majority of the elected, the actual voting public.
And what about
It's too divisive.
Is it purely on independence or not that you vote, the independence or the union, or do the policies matter as well?
I don't think that the SNP have created anything or done anything for businesses throughout Scotland.
What, in the time they've been in power?
Yeah.
That's strong words, really. Over 14 years, I think, in power
probably
now?
19 years.
After the fourth term in government.
Yeah, they haven't done anything.
You seem very fixed and firm in your views.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at even in Inverclyde, there's 2 boats sitting up there just now, which the SNP supported through the subsidy. What they'd be better doing is taking them out there and sinking them.
Gosh. Okay, well, that's very, very strong words. Thank you very much for that, Greg. Appreciate it. Got a couple of first-time voters down here. Of course, you can vote from 16 in a Scottish parliamentary election. Simon, you not quite 16,
I'm just over 16.
First time voting?
Yeah, my first time voting.
How did you find it?
Well, I thought it was a real privilege to be able to cast my vote for the first time. It was a really proud moment to see, to have an impact on how the future of my country.
Did you read all the manifestos? How did you find them?
I think that's happened to a lot of young people. They were far more encouraged to read through lots of different manifestos to make up their own minds on who to vote for.
That's really interesting and really encouraging that you think younger voters are really engaged then.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a real point from Nicola Sturgeon.
And what do you think is the big battleground for you? What was the big issue?
I think the biggest issue is the independence referendum. I think that it's very clear that there's been a big divide between different parties, and I think that parties that supported the independence referendum clearly have had more support, especially from the younger people.
You supported the referendum. Do you want another referendum? How do you feel about it?
I would love another referendum. I think that it's important that the future of Scotland is in Scotland's hands.
Really? So you're pro-independence.
Very
Do you think there will be another referendum? Because, of course, Boris Johnson this morning said, not right now.
I'm confident.
Really? OK, thank you very much for that. Grace, finally, last but not least, Grace Devenny. How did you find voting for the first time?
It was such a good experience, and I love the fact that I got to exercise my right to vote for the first time, and the fact that my vote was a part of the number was just such good.
Of course, a couple of the parties had new leaders this time around. The Conservatives had a new leader, Labour had a new leader.
Yeah.
Can I ask you how you voted?
I voted Labour this year, yeah.
OK.
I really, really liked their stance on education and how they were prioritising vaccinations for teachers, which I always thought was something that was so important.
So independence wasn't the absolute...
I am pro-independence.
Okay.
I am pro-independence. That was one thing that was the divide between me voting Labour or SNP this year, because I am pro-independence, but the Labour policies kind of put it over the top for me.
People seem so entrenched, though, in Scotland in their views. I mean, are you fixed and firm, or do you think you're kind of at that stage now where you're sort of being influenced?
I think the Labour policies were the thing that swayed me towards voting for them, but SNP, I think Nicola Sturgeon is such a strong woman, and I think she's such a good influence to young girls, and it wasn't a fact of not agreeing with SNP's policies, it was just that I like Labour's a wee bit more. OK, thanks very much for that, Grace. Grace, Simon, Greg and Susanna, thank you all for that. Really interesting views there. It gives you a sense of the wide range of opinions here in Scotland and how strongly I think some people here feel about that debate over independence or the union, which is going to continue. And now, with Nicola Sturgeon promising a post-pandemic referendum once the COVID crisis is over, and Boris Johnson saying he doesn't feel that now is the time. And of course, the power to hold a referendum lies with the Westminster government.
Certainly a mixed range of opinions there, Lorna. Thanks for going through that with everybody. Appreciate that. We'll be back with you in about 10 minutes to see you diving into the water. That's great. Much appreciated.
Yeah, Lorna doesn't appreciate that.
No, Lorna's gone.
Now, in England, the first big result came in Hartlepool. Of course, that was here on this programme yesterday when a Conservative MP was elected for the first time in more than 60 years.
Yeah, Labour also lost control of several councils and the Conservatives made gains. So what's going on in voters' minds? Why this shift?
Now, our political correspondent, Chris Mason, is in Hartlepool, somewhere on that big ship. He's been enjoying it. Oh, no, he's off the ship now. I think he's been kicked off for bad behaviour, probably.
He's gone searching for political metaphors, I think.
Chris, how are you doing? You've been made to walk the plank.
Morning to you. Morning to you both. Yeah, I was told to walk the plank. I'll tell you why I was told to walk the plank, because I made the cardinal sin a little earlier on of calling this magnificent ship a boat. Never call it a boat, it is a ship. HMS Trincomalee, the oldest still afloat warship in Europe, docked here in Hartlepool as we reflect on all things elections, but also reflecting on attractions reopening. Touch wood, fingers crossed. May the 17th, a week on Monday. This, the National Museum of the Royal Navy, had a tough year like so many attractions, but hoping to be back open as so many places are in what, 10 days or so time. We can talk to Rosalind, who is the manager here. Morning to you. Thanks for having us. Tell us about this ship, and it's definitely a ship.
Definitely a ship, definitely a ship. We appreciate your correction of that. So HMS Trincomalee, as you've rightly pointed out, oldest warship still afloat in Europe. And despite her impressive display of guns, she actually didn't serve any time in active combat, although she gave very dedicated service and travelled over 100,000 miles across the world.
Isn't that extraordinary? 100,000 miles, and you think, what has she seen? Where has she been? Who's been up there on those decks?
Absolutely, and throughout that time protecting British interests. So, and after that, after her active service, she served the rest of most of her days as a training ship. And then in the 80s fell into disrepair and was brought to Hartlepool in 1990 for a very impressive restoration, which we see the result of now. And that was 15 years worth at £10.5 million. So.
And tell us about your big hoped for reopening and how difficult it's been over the last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a really tough year for everyone, hasn't it? But visitor attractions have really felt the damage, and being closed for a whole year. I think we only managed to open for about 6 weeks last year. Was really tough for the museum, tough for the staff, and really sad not to have those visitors come through the door. So we'll be really pleased to reopen on the 17th.
Well, we wish you luck in 9 days time, and thanks very much for having us this morning. Let's switch from talking history to talking politics, and I can introduce you to Mohammed and to Sasha and to Georgie. Let's talk to you first, Mohammed. I think you describe yourself as a floating voter.
Yes, that's
floating voters. You are the very personification of the kind of person that politicians just love to charm because you are persuadable. What do you make of what's been happening in Hartlepool? It's an earthquake.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a shock. I mean, it's a big victory for the Conservative Party, and really pleased that Jill has been elected. And it's good to have a lady MP on board as well. It's the first time for a lady MP in Hartlepool. So really looking forward to seeing her fulfil her promises and bring the underprivileged to the good status and work for the Hartlepool and the community, bring some jobs to Hartlepool, bring education, training for the youngsters so they don't have to move out of town to, for example, me, I work in Newcastle, I have to go out of town to work. So see more jobs and more people working in Hartlepool and prospering in Hartlepool.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's such a focus, isn't it, for so many people, bringing more jobs and investment and attention to Hartlepool. Let's bring Georgie into the conversation. And Georgie, you're a long-standing Labour supporter from a long-standing Labour-supporting family, which has been very normal in the northeast of England for so long, and suddenly isn't. What do you make of it?
I think it boils down to the issue that there is a level of disillusionment and disenfranchisement with both local and national politics and leaders. And I think for Labour, unfortunately, they've had quite a tumultuous few years. So they've kind of lost support, and I think they need to have a stronger opposition to the Conservatives.
Thank you for that. We're bringing Sasha as well at the end of the line here. We're all maintaining social distancing in the rain this morning. And Sasha, is that the crux of it, that there's been a sort of disillusionment here for many people with Labour, people drifting away from Labour?
Yes, I mean, I think you can see at the result yesterday, it wasn't so much that the Tories increased the number of votes, but the Labour vote collapsed, completely collapsed, and I think that's to do with what we've just heard, internal fighting locally, internal fighting nationally, a feeling that the Labour Party policies don't engage with their heritage supporters in this part of the world. They are leaning towards the metropolitan areas, and it doesn't sit well in communities like ours.
Thank you all for your time, standing out in the rain. Final thought, John and Naga. Imagine being on that fantastic ship, HMS Trincomalee, in 1817 when it was built. The heavens open, it's getting a bit choppy, and you're out on the ocean. It's quite a thought, isn't it?
It is, it absolutely is, but I'm very pleased you redeemed yourself by calling it a ship.
We were just looking up, actually, Chris. What's the difference? What's the difference between a ship and a boat? And it seems a little bit confused.
I think it is. I've been taught, having spent the morning in the museum of the Royal Navy, I've been taught this fact. A boat can get onto a ship, but not the other way round, is what I'm told. And this is definitely a ship. Ship, ship, ship.
Ship, ship,
Be
ship.
very
Well
careful
done.
how you say that.
Chris.
Right, thank you very much indeed.
Chris, thanks so much, Chris Mason there. Mike would have known all of that. I'm sure you've been on numerous ships, boats, whatever.
Avoiding that. Chris looked very ship-shaped, didn't he? Not wearing a coat this morning.
Certainly not boat-shaped.
He's a hard man, isn't he?
He's a tough... He's Northern. That's it. That's all we've got time for this morning. Breakfast back tomorrow from 6. Enjoy your weekend.
Stay dry. Bye.
Bye.